Well, good morning, Isaac, from Lexington, Kentucky, from the La Quinta Inn on Canebrake Drive, as we're on our way to visit family up in Ohio. I've got my coffee mug today, which is my traveling Tervis. And looks like we're ready to go this morning. We're starting a new look into the book of James, and look forward to what we're going to learn together about James. So let me begin by asking you a question, Isaac. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much joy do you have in your life right now?
It's a good question. We're a Friday morning. I can honestly tell you that I'm a 10 plus right now.
Ooh,
Yeah.
joy is pounding the knee.
Part of it is that we're going through James this morning. So one, you sent me over your notes earlier this week, so I spent time in James 1, and so that it helps,
Right.
to at least keep you focused on that. But also this living in a time of sort of trials and tribulations right now. So, but that'll be what we talk about today. But I can honestly say that I'm feeling full of joy right now.
Well, wonderful. And that's what we want to talk about. James, he's the most practical writer in the New Testament. His writings have been called sometimes the Proverbs of the New Testament because it's just practical wisdom. And when I think about this study in the book of James, I'm thinking of it as practical faith that flows from godly wisdom. So each of our discussions will be focused on some aspect of living out our faith in a very practical way. And in this first section, James jumps right in and starts talking about joy. He says, brothers, count it all joy. And so he wants us to know today that regardless of what circumstance we're in, our joy should not be affected by that, because joy and there's a difference between happiness, which is dependent on your circumstances, and joy, which is that inner contentment of the soul that is independent of your circumstance. And it's only possible as a fruit of the Spirit if you have trusted Christ as your Savior and Lord and are trusting him to guide and direct your life. Then you're trusting him with every circumstance of your life. How has that played out for you here recently?
Well, I had this thought just as you're saying that about James, that I feel like James is underutilized as a sort of reading plan for new Christians or anyone that's struggling. Like, I feel like we always kind of flex towards just starting the Gospels, and read about Jesus, which is absolutely where you should start. The whole book is about Jesus. But then very shortly after understanding Jesus and his life, I feel like James and the practicality of it is where you should go next, because that's the struggle of the Christian life. Is for those of us in the church that believe, right? I think the struggle is, how do I take this belief and act it out in real life? Like, what does it mean today? Like, as I wake up in my job with my family and my life and my house, going to the places that I go, what does Jesus have to do with all of that? And that's what I love about James.
Yeah. Does he have any?
It's very practical. So James is a Monday through Saturday book of the Bible.
Yes.
And I think that's, your quick math, Monday through Saturday take up more of our time than Sunday. And so there's a need for those in the church to understand how to walk out the Christian life. And I just love how James, you talk about the wisdom and the practicality, that if you pair Proverbs and James and spend a lot of time there, I'm betting that your walk is going to be more fulfilling, more purposeful, more full of Christ than if you don't.
All right. What do we do with that?
Knocked you out of your seat there.
We did. That was powerful. Boom.
Yeah.
Shall we continue?
To continue answering your question, though, like this, especially these first parts of James 1, being able to deal with struggle and trials and things that happen to you that you don't like, I think is very high on the list of what differentiates the Christian life from those without. And it's also, I think, the most valuable tool that God gives us through Jesus is the ability to handle trials, tribulations, struggles in a manner that not only is just different, but just a manner that helps us, that grows us, and that teaches us who He is. Like, that's where your Christian life, the rubber meets the road, is when poop hits the fan. Like, that's when this life shows up and makes a difference in your life and in those around you. And so I think this is just such valuable words that I know for me, when I started to internalize this chapter specifically, and especially the first 12 verses that we're going to go through today, it completely changed my life and the track that I was on, and then ultimately, where God has taken me from there.
Well, that's a great testimony. And the trials of life will come. Things do hit the fan. Jesus told us that right before he went to the cross. He said, look, in this world, you will have tribulation, but take heart, take courage. I've overcome the world. So your joy doesn't have to be dependent on whether you're having a good day or not. Your joy, if it's centered in Jesus and the victory that he has given you, will enable you to live under your circumstances with great joy. And so, the book begins identifying who's writing it. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. So he considers himself a servant of Christ, even though he is a half brother of Christ. But he wasn't buying into the deity of Jesus until he met him as the resurrected Lord and Savior. And then he very quickly became a deep follower and then a leader of the church, as we see him in Acts chapter 15 leading the way. So that's who this is.
That's got to be a tough life, though, right? Brother of Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And so you could probably understand why he was kind of checked out early on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is an interesting part to my earlier point, that like he didn't know about the Gospels, basically. Like that whole Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the story of Jesus' life. James was checked out for that. And
right,
he'd probably at this point been updated on a lot of that had happened, but he wasn't there like the disciple.
He's
like
living it out now. Yeah,
he wasn't there with Jesus that entire time, but he met the risen Christ, and he said, "Oh, this is real. This is real." And so now, what does this do to my life?
Yeah, and indeed, what does it? And it changes his life. And he's writing to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. So he's writing to the Christian Jews who have fled Jerusalem because of persecution. We saw that in Acts chapter 8, verse 1, when that happens. And so he's trying to catch up with them and encourage them in the trials and persecution as they live away from their homeland. They haven't been able to come home yet. And so he's encouraging them in the midst of those storms and trials. And count it all joy, my brothers.
Sorry, I'm in an interrupted mood this morning. It's the joy that overflows out of me.
I get it.
Like when we say trials and tribulations, right? Trials of various kinds. Like we think of things, right? That we deal with, that you and I deal with. But do you have some examples of the trials that these people that James was writing to were going through?
Well,
they're a little different than what we do.
Right. The intensity might be just a notch above what we worry about when we have a paper cut. But he's talking about guys who fled after the stoning of Stephen, if that gives you a hint on that's what launched the persecution. And then Saul was arresting people and throwing them in jail until his conversion. And then, so these folks are, and now they live in the pagan lands, the Gentile world. They're building synagogues and they're worshiping the Lord, but they're doing it in places where people are not, for the most part, fearing God or walking with God. So they're exiled.
So they've got their own people who did not believe in Jesus are coming after them and killing them.
Right. And
then they flee from the Israel area. And then now they're in these pagan lands. Where is this time of Nero?
James himself will die in 62. So this was written before then. This is around the time of Nero, but other
But either
Roman
at this
emperors.
time or very soon after this, which this letter is preparing these Christians for, they end up being used as candles, like gathered up
Right.
and used to light Nero's palace by being set on fire.
Right.
So you got
Right.
your own people chasing you down to kill you because you believe in Jesus. And then you got these other people that aren't your own people that are just killing you because they don't like what you say either. And so, like, that's trials and tribulations is not just someone said something mean about me, or I don't agree with that person's opinion, or my government is passing laws that I don't believe in, like that I'm allowed to
Right.
vote. Like that's like
This is
our world
this is
right now. And we have trials and tribulations, not to minimize those because this speaks to us, but just to set the stage that this was meant for the purest definition of trials and tribulations, and it still applies.
right. And certainly our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world today, in Ukraine and in China and persecuted lands, would be experiencing something very close to what was happening in the first century.
Yes, we are
And so,
very blessed in America.
yes. And so in that context, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and that let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, that is, mature in your faith, lacking nothing. And so in order to be joyful in these hard circumstances, practical joy has to recognize that God is at work when trials come. It's not that we expect to live a life devoid of trials, and when one comes, we're absolutely derailed by it. But we anticipate that trials will come, that life will be hard and difficult, but that God will always be working in the midst of that to deepen us and to grow us. And it's the testing, it's the proving of your faith. It's demonstrating that your faith is real, which is what James is all about. He wants to see your faith. And one way that you see how your faith is expressed is how you handle difficulty in life, knowing that God's goal in that difficulty is to produce steadfastness or patience in your life, which will then have its full effect that you will be a mature follower of Christ. And when we think of that word patience or steadfastness, it's an interesting word. It means endurance with respect to circumstances, not people. It's associated with hope. It refers to the quality that does not surrender to circumstances or succumb under trial. It's an endurance. It's a pressing through, pressing on, despite the difficulties of life. And so count it all joy, because that means God is at work in your life when you have difficulty.
And that's good.
So look for what he's doing.
Yeah. So
ask yourself the question.
That's the other part of, when these things start to happen, then first of all, it's choosing joy, to count it as a blessing that these trials are happening, because you know that the trials are they're gonna firm up your faith. It's gonna make your faith more real than it was before that trial. And so it's a deeper relationship. And what does that mean, that it's more real? It means that you know God better.
Exactly.
You know Jesus better. So the God of the universe that created everything, that's running everything, that guy, you get to know him better through these trials because you lean on him and you depend on him more. And so you get to see his love, his peace, his grace, his joy in you.
Yes.
You understand it and realize it more. And so you get an opportunity. You cannot do that in times without trials.
No, you won't. You'll start to think that you're doing a great job because everything's going so smoothly for you. And the other part of this is practical joy understands and wants and values growth and that getting closer to God over relief from circumstance. Most of the time, our prayer is, Lord, get me out of this, instead of, Lord, deepen me through this.
Yes.
That's
And
the
so
prayer of joy.
I think this stage has to happen before you can do one. Like
Yeah.
you've got to come to the point where you value growth in your life over ease and relief. And just like think about how many of the prayers that we say, hey, safe travels. Like can I request prayers for safe travels? Like, okay, like that's so common, or just straight up someone's sick or something's going on and we just immediately like heal that person of that, like get rid of it.
Right.
Anytime, like go through your church's prayer request chain, and how many of those prayer requests are rid me of this trial,
Right. Give me relief, or
give me relief.
deepen me through this. Accomplish your purpose, Lord, through this sickness.
And this doesn't mean
Draw
that
me
you like,
closer.
it doesn't mean that you enjoy or want the bad things. Like Jesus prayed a prayer like this in the garden. He's about to go get crucified. He
Right.
knew that was going to be extreme. He
Right.
prayed to God. He did say, Lord, if it's possible, let me not do this, but your will be done. I value the growth and your will being executed over my own relief. It doesn't mean that you can't ever say, hey, God, my request is that you heal me of this cancer. Right.
Right.
But at the end of the day, your will be done. Help this, whatever trial I'm going through, to produce a greater dependence on you, to help me know you more, and to help your will be done. Because that's when God shows up. Like all the motivational God videos that you see that make you cry watching them,
Right.
somebody was going through hell, and God
Right.
rescued them from it. He didn't necessarily give them relief, but they knew him better at the end of it. And it's so you got to value that growth, because if you do that, you start to see that the way you get that growth is through the trials and tribulations. And so when you step into something and you're like, this is getting tough, there's a mentality and a heartality, I don't
Okay. Yeah.
where you say, all right, I'm about to learn. I'm about to see God through this. And that's what produces joy in you, because you get excited to experience the living God, and that knowing that that's the only way. And so if you're not careful, you start looking for trouble.
Right. Well, maybe not looking for it, but thanking God for it as you go through it. How many
Right.
people have you heard say at the end of a battle with cancer, and maybe it's not the end, but it's the middle, and they don't know that yet, but they say, I thank God for the cancer because I know him better now. And everything he's done in my life through the cancer makes me praise him and know him more. And so we can experience the joy of the Lord through our circumstances if we value that that's what the possibilities are, and that's what he's
So
doing.
many Christians look at their Christian life as like, hey, I accepted Jesus, I believe in Jesus, and now I have direct access to talk to God. Whenever anything bad happens, I can talk to him and he'll take care of it.
And he'll take it away. Thanks, God.
And it's like, that's such a weak version of Christianity that like,
Go back and read it again, because that's not what it promised.
yeah. And so like our prayer life needs to change. And if you can base your prayer life off of this, there was one time, and it's just the one time because I feel like I learned this lesson. I'm still learning this lesson, where I actually prayed that God would make something hard on me.
I remember you told me that story. I was impressed about where you were headed.
It was multiple years ago, and I'm still working through it. Like, it's still hard. And it's like that's
he answered the prayer.
Yeah, that's the testing of the faith and steadfastness. There's no quick way to learn steadfastness.
No.
But that prayer came out of me spending time in James 1 and realizing, coming to the conclusion that, I was walking into an opportunity that my gut was, hey, God, can you help this go well? Like, help this go well and be successful. And then I was like, no, you know what? Actually, like, make me work for this. I want this to produce fruit in me. And I recognize the only way to do that is if it's hard. And as soon as I said I was like trying to grab him back. I was like, no, wait, what did I just do?
Right.
And of course, that's the one that God was like, okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that.
Oh, yeah. I was going to answer one of your prayers today. The next one.
And that's the one. Got it.
Yeah.
but that mindset is so valuable, and there's been so much that I've learned over the years just in that one scenario. So much that I've learned about myself, so many opportunities to grow. I haven't taken advantage of every single one of them, but
Sure.
they've been there. Yeah, they've been there, and it's just this different mindset. And so I was jokingly saying, you go out and seek trouble. Like, don't go make trouble for yourself, but
Right.
you don't have to go create it, because there's enough of it in the world. There's enough
Plenty.
opportunities in your marriage, with your kids, at work, whatever you do. There's plenty of trials that come your way, and those are opportunities for you to experience God.
Right. And so in order to get here, James recognizes as he's writing this, I think, that what he's talking about, this mindset of counting it all joy, if you're going to do that, you're going to have the wisdom of God. So the next thing he says in verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, so if you're not there yet, if you can't embrace verses 2, 3, and 4, then you need the wisdom of God. So if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. You've got to believe that God is and that he will answer your prayer. And then when he does act upon it, James is the action book. Don't just hear it, but do it. And so ask in faith without doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that's just driven and tossed by the wind. That person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord, for he is double-minded, unstable in all his ways. But if you're truly asking God in faith, help me persevere in this trial. Help me learn and grow closer and deeper with you. Give me the wisdom to know how to do that. That's the prayer that God answers, and he will answer it abundantly and liberally, because he has generosity with respect to the wisdom that he shares with those who act in faith.
Think about a wave of the sea, right? The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. Like in a sea full of turmoil, the waves are just all over the place. And if the wind changes, if the currents change, that wave just goes with that. And like, what a description, what a picture that so many people today, that's your life. That you get out of bed, you open up, you check Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the news, whatever, and like that sends you in this direction. Or maybe you don't, but you get to work and someone interacts with you and that sends you this direction. Or you have a bad day at work, or your kids don't obey you, or they like in everything, all these things are happening to you, and that is what sends you your way. And it's different every day, and it just feels like you're getting beaten left and right from all different sides. Like that's the description of life, a wave in the sea that so many in and out of the church, Christians and non-Christians, like that's such an accurate description of what life can be.
Right.
And what James is saying here is that it's that way because you doubt. Because you doubt what? Because you doubt God. And if you get to a point in your life where you are able to consistently not doubt God,
right, then
that's a completely different experience.
You're on a surfboard on top of the wave when that happens.
No, you're walking on them. No surfboard needed. Now you're walking on the waves. And I think like the stories and the multiple stories in the Bible about bodies of water and how Jesus interacts with them differently than humans do. Right. And when you're able to take his hand, now you're walking on top. Because in those scenarios, like the storms were there, like Jesus was walking on the water at stormy times. It wasn't calm times. And so he was walking above your circumstances. He was dominating them, walking on a stormy sea. And so he lives his life dominating your circumstances. And he invites you
above them.
He invites you to join him there. And you can. He'll let you walk on the seas with him, dominate your circumstances with him. But it takes verses 2 through 4. And I agree with you. I think James was writing that and was like, listen, if you don't just like aren't automatically on board with what I just wrote, you need God's wisdom.
Right.
It's just not going to come. You're not going to be able to figure it out on your own. It's
No.
God's wisdom that you need. And so take this moment to ask it of him and trust him. And while I'm talking about you trusting him, if you don't, that's the wave in the sea. That's what your life is like. And so if you trust him, because if you don't trust him, verses 2-4 are really hard. You can't do it. They're impossible.
No,
You
because
can't.
you're bouncing around in verses 6, 7, and 8.
Right. And so if trials show up in your world and they send you in all types of different ways and rock you to your foundation, the issue is a lack of wisdom from God, and is a lack of trust in God. And so
Right.
if you're not able to step into trials that way, then your trust in God is lacking in some way. And so, but the good news is all you have to do, it doesn't say in verse 5, if you lack wisdom, figure it out, and come specifically ask God the specific areas of the wisdom that you need. You don't have to figure it out. Just go to God and say, God, I'm struggling here.
Right.
Help me.
Right.
And then believe that he will.
Yeah. And then act upon it when he does. Well, the next thing that practical joy knows is that your joy is not based on your material possessions or this temporary life. He said, let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade in the midst of his pursuits. This life is temporary. Whatever you've accumulated, whether it's a little or a lot, in the grand scheme of eternity does not matter. So don't focus on your material possessions or your lack of material possessions. Focus on the wisdom of God. And some people think they can buy their way out of their trials. And that doesn't work. That just creates more misery. But instead of being focused on this temporary material world, he says, verse 12, which really is the capstone of this thought of that we're following here, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. So he stays under the trial all the way through. For when he has stood the test, when he's passed the test, you might say, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. So now James is taking it all the way out to the eternal perspective that gives us joy. Practical joy has this eternal perspective of knowing that God is loving us. He's going to see us all the way home. He's going to provide for us. It creates an anticipation of what eternity will be like, that we'll receive the crown of life. That's everlasting life. That's the reward of heaven that we will receive when we stay faithful, even underneath the trial. This word for steadfast, when he says remain steadfast, it's almost exactly the same Greek word, just two of the letters are switched, where the E and the O are replaced. So it makes it a different word, but it means to remain, to endure, or sustain a heavy load of miseries, adversities, persecutions, or provocations in faith and patience. Remain under it. And so that's God's plan for us, is that we would remain steadfast. When we count it all joy, we grow in our steadfastness, we become mature in patience, and that enables us to live it out to the end until we get to eternity with him. That's a great, great promise.
And really, so it's, what are you pursuing, right? Because he talks about the rich man fading away in the midst of his pursuits. So it's, are you pursuing your pursuits, or are you pursuing God's plan for your life? And God's plan for your life is that steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And so God's concerned about growing you from the inside, not relieving you from the outside, but growing you on the inside. Your the rich man's pursuits, our carnal pursuits, are all external in nature. And so, what are you pursuing on a day-to-day basis? Are you more concerned about chasing down your goals, or are you more concerned about being who God created you to be?
Great question. And the other piece of this I want to make sure we don't miss, because I love noticing when the writers of the Bible are speaking in the plural. James is writing to scattered believers, but those believers are congregated in churches, in synagogues. They're meeting together. And so he addresses them in the plural. Brothers, count it all joy when you go through these trials. And there's a camaraderie that is expected in the midst of the trials. We help each other. Paul said in Galatians that we bear one another's burdens. We come up under there with you and help you walk the long journey carrying a heavy load. You're not carrying it alone. You're carrying it with other believers who believe like you do, that God is faithful, and joyfully together we will hit the finish line and experience our eternal rewards. So we do it together. That's very important. Don't try to do this alone.
Yeah. So my encouragement to anyone out there, if you have trials,
Yes,
all of us, go read verse 1 through 12 of James. James 1 through 12. Sit in it, read it multiple times. If you've got trials that come to your mind that you're struggling with and that you want relief out of, go to God, express that desire, and then ask for his wisdom to see the growth and the development. And one of my mentors, Jeff Powell, always told us about a prayer he prayed that, God, help me get it the first time. Like pray for the request of, help me get this so that I can get your joy out of this, and then we can move on to the next one.
right. It's a good prayer. Help me get it the first time.
Yep.
And then so that I can help somebody else. Because that's the other thing, as you ask God for wisdom and you're trying to discern how to work through this trial, pay attention to the people God brings across your path. Because he might just bring a Barnabas or a Luke or a brother along to help with the trial, because God works through people. And so he might bring a Jeff Powell along at just the right time to encourage and help.
Well, that street goes both ways too, right? Because so like we go through trials, and so often we keep them to ourselves and we don't share them with others because we think we're the only ones that are going through it. So one, as you are able to find the joy in your trials and experience God in that, he's going to give you other people going through those trials that you can then bless with that sharing. But also, like, you'll be amazed at how many, if you're open about what you're going through, how many other people currently are in that same boat, or maybe they've been through that in the past, right? Like, there are people that have already been through James 1 in this specific area that can help you get there. And there's
right.
The book of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. Anything you're dealing with, someone around you has dealt with, is dealing with, or will deal with, for the most part. So
right. And that's why the devil doesn't want us to talk about it. He wants us to keep it to ourselves, because saying it out loud will help someone else, or we'll find the solution from someone else. That's why he likes to keep us isolated. That's why we need the body of Christ, other believers in our life, sharpening together, and we hold these burdens up together. It's exactly how it works. All right, friends, hopefully we've encouraged you today to count it all joy. Hopefully your joy meter is higher now than it was when we started this. Isaac's is pegging the needle. Mine is right there as well. We choose to count it all joy because we know and believe that God is working and he's going to grow us through the difficulties of life. All right. God bless you till next time.
See you next week.
Cheers.